Hey everybody. Okay, so I just am finishing up the editing of the first 4 chapters that hopefully you just watched in the series on Seven Samurai and all of its influences. And at the end I mentioned that I wasn't going to cover Rebel Moon at all because enough was enough and you gotta cut it off somewhere, but I thought as a celebration of finishing or getting to the end of editing those movies and writing them, for some reason they took a long time, I don't know why, but they just took me a long time to get through those 4 chapters. I thought I would just watch it like Rebel Moon as a celebratory thing. And then as soon as I did, I was like, how could I have left this out? Oh my god! And I just started making notes and notes and notes. So I've got notes here, and I'm just going to run through all of this quickly so I can get it out of my system, because it's just totally crazy. And I guess the title, or the thesis, or whatever, like this, the statement that I'm making here is, Rebel Moon is just Netflix Star Wars Marvel cope. And I'm not just being a hater. I actually kind of enjoyed a bunch of these 2 movies, but I think critically or analytically I'd say it was sort of mid. The more critical you decide to be on these movies, the worse they fare. If you don't know, if you're living under a rock or whatever, Rebel Moon is Zack Snyder's IP designed to replace all the Star Wars and Marvel stuff that Netflix lost when Disney Plus came online. It's really that simple. He took the general plot of Seven Samurai and overlaid the original Star Wars trilogy on top of that, and I'm just going to run through these notes here now, stuff that came to mind, stuff that they borrowed pretty unabashedly, and also, weirdly enough, Zack Snyder pitched this to Disney as a Star Wars movie way back in 2012, and they rejected it. So, and it explains so much, like the not lightsabers, even knowing that it was intended as a Star Wars movie. I think the weird copycat thing he does is even more lame. Although, to be fair, Force Awakens is just a soft reboot of A New Hope, so maybe the firm ground that Disney stood on to say, nah, we're not doing this, kind of pissed it away when they ended up just doing something as derivative, in my opinion. Now, to be clear, I think that doing a Seven Samurai plot with Star Wars as the stage for it, I think it's a cool idea. I even mentioned 2 other versions of this exact idea in the previous video I posted, Chapter 4, the Clone Wars episode and the Mandalorian episode, but they were just so much better. They were more successful at what they did, and they also weren't just copying Star Wars scenes, which you'll see what I mean as we go. Now I'm going to talk about stuff that's going to spoil this movie, or these 2 movies, although I'll leave it up to you to decide whether that really matters, because this movie isn't particularly surprising if you've seen any version of Seven Samurai or Star Wars. There are twists on the formula, but also some missteps or missed opportunities. And I don't mean the ending, where even though our female lead is set up to be like the most badass warrior the galaxy's ever known, a veritable Jane Wick, if you will, she's then just saved by some white guy at the end. Because while I don't think it's important, it did happen, which I thought was anticlimactic if you were engaged in her story, which I think we all were supposed to be. But anyway, the entire look of the film and the visual aesthetic is kind of bland. It's like they put everything into a blender and came up with beige. The farming village is this Amish, European, Western farmhouse lifestyle choice for the off-grid homesteader types, while the villains are just homogenous anime Nazis. It's not like the Imperials in Star Wars weren't already a stand-in for Nazis, but these ones just dress in actual Nazi uniforms, and they even wear ties from time to time. Actually, they're called the Imperium. Yep. Totally nothing like Imperials. It's totally different. It's one of my gripes for the movie that we're so far into space, and yet every planet is just LARPing as some theme of a Westworld planet, or a Greek-Roman planet, or I assume Charlie Hunnam's from like an Irish planet, because otherwise I'm not sure how he retained that accent. They also go to a Blade Runner planet, too, where this universe keeps all of their Asian people, and almost everybody speaks English. We do see aliens a couple times, but they also speak English mostly, and seem to not be very prevalent in space, despite it being a bunch of alien planets that we're on. Curious? This could be because of the space Nazis, or they're always being described as being murderous and ruthless and shown to kill multiple monarchs and rulers, so perhaps this is a universe where the human race has dominated all the other planets by wiping out most of the other species. But if that were the case, why do the farmers need to be convinced that these are bad people? I don't think that we should dwell on this any longer than the screenwriters clearly didn't. I don't think I need to go over the Seven Samurai plot again. This is chapter 5 in a series, so if you need a refresher, feel free to start with chapter 1. I'm sure everyone's thankful that I'm not going to go over all the same stuff I already did 4 times before. Okay, so let's get into this. To start off, at the beginning, we see this farming village, and our leading lady is tilling the soil, and she hits a rock and proceeds to pull this big stone out of, like, the softest earth I've ever seen. And the rock doesn't look indigenous to this dirt, or even the right color, or even that it was stuck in the ground at all, and instead it just looks like this total corny prop. Let's talk about our lead, Miss Jane Wick here. It's one of the few twists on the old formula that I thought was cool. You know, if you've watched the previous 4 chapters, you'll realize, like, the lead hero, the leader of the group, is almost never a woman, so as sad as it is, that's an innovation in 2024. So our lead farmer lady, who will go out looking for help, is actually a deadly warrior hiding from the world, and is only forced to engage again when that world finds her. But that's sort of squandered somewhat by Snyder's every oblique gesture and nod and hint and wink, so that when she intervenes in stopping this gang rape, you're already waiting for what you know is going to happen. It's not surprising, it's plodding along because of how obvious it is. Her name's Cora. Also, she's called Arthaleus in her past life, and she's like the ultimate trained killer assassin of renowned legend. Everybody knows her and is scared of her, so basically she is the Baba Yaga. That's a John Wick reference if you're not a John Wick person. When the lead bad guy comes in and kills the village leader, it's so obvious what's going to happen because we've all seen Inglourious Basterds. I'm just kidding. It's not really the same exactly, but like that opening scene is very similar to the opening scene in Inglourious Basterds. When waiting for this stuff to happen, it gets a little frustrating, right? Because Zack Snyder's also in his John Woo bag, and he's putting every 2 out of 3 shots as a slow motion shot, so it really extends the runtime. Cora is pretty cool otherwise, and the action's really tight and fun, I suppose. Everything visually, like the aesthetic of, not the design aspect of it, just what, you know, how the cinematography of how it was shot does look very pretty for the whole thing. And Cora's cool until we see the weird Marvel envy on display in this flashback scene where she gives her origin and she just says, "My name is Gamora, and Thanos is my daddy. Samesies!"
Belisarius killed my entire family and took me with him. I don't know why he spared me. Why, of the hundreds of thousands that died at his hands, he chose me to live.
Not original. In the farming village, Cora has this boy, this guy that she likes, one of the farmers. He goes with her on the quest, and he becomes the second of our seconds. So we've got Cora as the first of the 7, then we get this guy. I'm not going to bother with their names, I don't know, they're all so generic. But he's also the romance subplot for her, so they retain the romance from Seven Samurai. Charlie Hunnam, from Irish Planet, is a less noble Han Solo, and if I was to compare him to other archetypes that we've seen in the previous chapters, I'd say that he's similar to the George Peppard character from Battle Beyond the Stars, who's more of like a smuggler or treasure seeker type, and he helps them find their other allies. He's got the ship that they need to get off world. Sound familiar? But let's just go back a second and look at this scene in the cantina. I mean, the saloon, where not Obi-Wan has to mangle up a weird-faced alien creep who's hitting on his pretty man friend.
Move on, there's nothing for sale.
Everything's for sale in this place.
He doesn't like you.
Sorry. Yeah, I have a room.
I don't like you either.
Clean.
You just watch yourself.
generous
We're wanted men.
But I don't
I
think so.
have the death sentence on
guarantee
12
you find
systems.
more. I'll be careful. You're gonna be dead.
You'll be dead. This little one's not worth the effort. Come, let me get you
Come
some.
on,
So yeah, that's a pretty naked homage or tribute or whatever. This entire series is just that. Anyway, this is where not Obi-Wan and not Luke meet not Han Solo to take them on his ship. So that's the third of our group so far. The next guy, I keep calling him John Carter. He's this shirtless wild man who's also ends up being revealed to be royalty. When they meet him, he's currently an indentured slave, and in order to win his freedom, he has to ride this griffin-looking animal and break it like cowboys breaking a wild horse. If he doesn't succeed, then they're all going to be enslaved. And this, of course, strikes me as familiar, like Qui-Gon meeting Anakin, who is a slave and flies in the pod race to win his freedom. I wouldn't normally have noticed this comparison, but when you add it to the crazy pile of other borrowed scenes, it seems way more likely that that's directly what this is. Now, beyond Star Wars, if we were to compare Rebel Moon to Seven Samurai, the investment in the guy riding the animal for his freedom is silly because, of course, he's going to win, right? That's the formula. It could have been more interesting had he not been able to ride it and then they're all enslaved and have to work their way out of that situation, but Snyder's using the Seven Samurai template. The original Seven didn't need us to think that they were in jeopardy as they were being recruited, right? That adds some suspense to everything. You could see that they're clever, that they're charismatic, that they have a good friendship and trust with the other members of our team, but we don't need to pretend like maybe he won't join the team, maybe he's gonna die and we'll have to find some other guys, maybe the whole story will change and they'll become slaves trying to get, like, that's not what's gonna happen. So it feels like a lot of wasted time. The flying griffin that he gets on is just spectacle, but we're not invested in this jeopardy. This feels like peak Snyder aesthetic. Everything's obvious and telegraphed, and worse still is the outcome. Buckbeak here kills the slave owner immediately after he's supposedly tamed, and as his dozen or so ranch hands watch their boss being murdered, they don't seem to care at all, which makes you wonder why Korra just didn't kill the slave owner to start with. I mean, John Carter does say that he has to earn his freedom, but why honor a slave owner? I don't think anyone really gives a... Anyway, that's our fourth companion. Well, we get to the Blade Runner planet with the Spider Lady. There's another pointless battle to show that our new team member's a toughie. It's not very economical to make everybody prove their merit in such an obvious way. I really don't... I don't think it's clever. Even in this fight scene, the fight is tiresome. There's like all these flashing blades, but when she wants to, she just cuts off one of the Spider Lady's legs. So like, why not cut off her legs with each sword slash? There's no explanation. Sometimes Spider Lady can defend from the swords, and other times, oops, my arm just got cut off. Whoa, what a bummer. Now the hero they're going to recruit, she gets her hand impaled, and it turns out that it's a robot hand. Oh no. What will be the consequences? Can she no longer use that hand now because it was stabbed all the way through with the sparky sparks? No, she's fine. Never mind. But let's just get out our Star Wars bingo chart and tick off list for character gets hand cut off and replaced by robot hand. So that's our fifth character. And then we go to Gladiator Planet, which is more sort of dead Western culture that gets spread across the future universe for some reason to find the old general who, you know what it kind of reminds me of? It kind of reminds me of, like, in Star Trek The Next Generation. At least it was cool that the indigenous people left Earth to go be like, oh, well, you guys F this place up, we're going to find our own planet. But then there's that other Season 7 episode where Crusher goes to Ireland Planet. Like, they actually have an... Or is it Scottish Planet? Maybe it's Scottish Planet. Anyway. Gaelic Planet. It reminds me of that, where it's weird. It's like the culture just got carried forward, but we go to so many planets and they're all so white, except for Blade Runner Planet, because that's where they keep the Asian people. So we're on Gladiator Planet, and we're supposed to find the old general who functions as the old friend as well, knowing Korra's mentor, and he's also the drunk, and he's played by Jaimon Hansu. Now, he used to be this great warrior, but now he lives in seclusion, which is totally not an Obi-Wan Kenobi type role. It's just not. You can stop making that comparison. They're nothing alike. And that's the sixth member of our group. Now, another interesting twist on the established conventions is this scene where they go to recruit the rebels that they've been feeding with the surplus grain, right? So the farmer's been growing the grain and they've been selling some of it to the rebels that hate the Imperium, sorry. And they're called the Blood Axes. And the farmers need to get more soldiers, right? And so they go and ask the Blood Axes to join because they're somewhat, you'd think that they're on the same side or allied in some way. One of them speaks up and makes this speech to convince the others that it's a worthy cause.
These people come to us with nowhere else to turn. They come seeking our help to stand against a dreadnought of the Mother World.
And it looks like a new scene for Seven Samurai, but I think it might be representative of that scene where the villagers are afraid of their newly arrived warriors to help them, and Kikuchiyo makes a speech shaming them for cowering instead of welcoming them. But actually, I made these notes earlier, but I now know that there's like another scene coming up as well. Kikuchiyo, having been a farmer himself, gives the scene a similar power in convincing the farmers, as in Rebel Moon the pirate brother does when he speaks to the rest of the Blood Axes.
Under free will, who among you is willing to die for what we believe, rather than hide behind it?
So he's recruited, and he even brings along his clan sister, and that makes our 7, or 8 if you count the sister, but we'll explain that. This is already a bit of a cheat, because the Elder Blood Axe guy dies before the end of the first movie, which would seem to adhere to the premise that not all of them are going to make it. But of course this has 2 problems. One, similar to Rogue One, I didn't care when any of those characters died, because I wasn't invested in them, so their deaths were totally empty to me. We barely have this Blood Axe guy's one scene with a speech, and then pretty much he dies. That's not fulfilling as a viewer, but then you also realize the second problem, which is that he brought along a homie. So obviously now that will be the character that we begin to invest in. But that doesn't stop this death from feeling empty. So it's kind of like it's like a mulligan. It's like, oh yeah, I killed a guy, but it doesn't matter because we got another one. So you'd think we're down to 6 because one was built to be sacrificed right away, when really Snyder just built in a backup, further underlining that the Elder Blood Axe brother guy isn't important or worth investing in as a viewer anyway. And I've seen the movie now a few times at the store over the last couple weeks, and like, yeah, it's empty. It feels hollow. I'm like, oh, that guy's gonna die again. Yeah, whatever. There's a terrible reversal scene where all of our leads are betrayed, and they're stuck paralyzed in these droid things. There's like a suitcase that walks along behind your bad guy, and then when he's like, go get that, it pops up and it basically like grabs a human being and holds them like a robot prisoner kind of thing. So they get stuck and they're all paralyzed, and there's this firefight that breaks out, and nobody shoots a single paralyzed prisoner. They're all standing there like immovable targets. It's so incredibly Star Wars. Villains that never hit their targets. Shades of Stormtrooper training. This all takes place at our Cloud City stand-in. If we go back to our Star Wars comparison, it's this remote outpost where Charlie Hunnam pulls a Lando Calrissian, which leads to our Luke and Vader fight on the weird space beacon thingy. The thing about Hunnam's turn as a Lando is that at least Han Solo and Lando used to be friends that go way back, right? So even if he's a little sketchy, he has the benefit of history with Han, making his betrayal all the worst. But Hunnam was just a creep in a bar with a ship, and he looked skeevy right from the start. So as a viewer, I'm not nearly as surprised as Korra, and quite honestly, I'm disappointed in her ability to like recognize good character in somebody. The end of part 1 feels so hollow, and if for no other reason than our heroes are foolish to think that that this is all over, when of course it isn't, because it's part 1 of 2, right? We see that the bad guy didn't die. It's not much of a cliffhanger. Not only that, but Snyder throws in a little Darth Vader resurrection along with a reveal of his Emperor-type character who, spoilers, he doesn't really pay off in both movies in any meaningful way. Not in part 1, not in part 2. It was just a waste of our time entirely. Part 2 is just as silly, and stuff alluded to in the first part doesn't all pay off. There are plot threads left hanging loose. The Emperor guy doesn't engage with the plot in any meaningful way, and there's more silliness, like now that the team left the Roman planet, our gladiator general guy gets to change his whole wardrobe, because now he's got to fit in on settler Western planet as a homesteader guy, so they just give him this entirely new wardrobe change. I mean, I know everybody can change clothes, right? But it just In part 2, the bad guys announce that they're going to be back in 5 days. So the farmers spend 3 days working double, triple overtime to get the harvest in, and then to prove how hard that work was, they have a big party and dance and drink. Because nothing says you're dead tired and on a zero deadline like a dance party. Kind of reminds me of in The Matrix, when it's like, the last city of humanity, let's have a big rave! Like, dude, we don't need to do that. What would have fixed this problem is either you don't have a party scene at all, or you could extend the lead time to 2 weeks, and then you'd give an air of believability that they'd have the time. They wouldn't ruin the pacing either, because much of the farming and training sequences are shown in montage anyway, lapsing the time for the viewer. Sorry, it's a bit nitpicky, I guess, of me, but it's one of those moments that take me right out of the movie. Alright, what's next? Oh, the Breakfast Club scene. So there's this moment in the second part where they all sit in a room and one by one they tell us their backstories, and I think it's a very hacky way to give your characters depth and by exposition. It's not that explaining a character's past is boring, but doing it a half dozen times in a row with flashbacks is a surefire way to slow down the middle of your film that should be building momentum and firing on all cylinders in the third hour of this story, not slowing down. And I really like the Breakfast Club scene that I'm referencing, like the original scene as well, but the relationships between those 5 teens was the whole point of that movie, sitting them in a room and getting them to talk. It's just really strange seeing it in Rebel Moon.
Cora, we haven't heard from you. What is your story?
I can, tape all of your buns together.
At the end of the first movie, there was the turnaround scene where we think that all of our heroes have lost, only to rally and come back. They were all captured and Lando betrayed them, but then the white guy farmer saved them all. So we get another turnaround, like the fastest turnaround scene of all these movies that I've covered. It's a big face-off between the village and the Imperium, and they land, and both sides walk out to state their terms and intentions. It's tense. Super Fascist tells her that if she surrenders, he's going to spare the farmers, but if not, they're going to kill the women and children. And then she just decides she's going to give up and concede. She's like, oh, well, that's very convincing. I guess we're good here now. But the white farmer guy shoots the bell that signals the start of their ambush. Right? So, yeah. The white bearded guy turned out to be a real savior. Isn't that fresh and original? Anyway, then the battle starts in earnest. It's a big brawl, a real brouhaha. A bunch of the villagers die. They take out the bad guys' platoon. There's this lull where we see the villagers and they think they've won and they roar in victory and cheer, and then we see the next wave coming at them through the haze of battle with like armored tanks, and then the villagers are all sad, like, oh, we didn't win. And like, so here's my problem with this. We've got the greatest general, right? This drunk guy that he's not drunk anymore, he cleans his act up. He figures out to put the rice against the buildings so they won't blow up the buildings. And they figured out the tunnels. They dig some tunnels to ambush the Imperials and throw grenades into their ships. And they arm everybody and they ran out into battle. And yes, the plan with the old Imperial shuttle, the old Imperial shuttle trick from Jedi to get on board does work. But he doesn't expect a second wave with an armored reinforcement. Like, really? What kind of a poor assessment does he have of the size of their armies and armaments? And it just seems silly. You can see the whole time there's the giant ship in orbit, and they're looking at it going, oh my god, that's so much. It's like a giant army. And then they take out like 50 people, and they're like, yay, we did it! Like, anyway. It's similar to the end of the first movie where somebody rightly says, do you think they'll come back? And they're like, nah. These homicidal authoritarian fascists, who at first were described to take everything and anything that each of them has a story about how this imperial cult of lunatics ravaged each of their lives on countless worlds, and then they're like, nah. They just follow these silly protocols like bureaucrats. In fact, there are multiple moments where it's pointed out how high their profile is now that all of the Empire's top enemies are together in one place with little to no resources. Why would they ever not attack and try and get them all? Their very presence now makes the conflict so much more important for the enemy. And they do mention the rice, I guess, right? The villagers are like, you can take some. And the Nazis are like, we're gonna take it all. But then it's quickly just turns into, just you, Arthur Leus. You're even more special than all the others who are also exciting to try and kill or capture. Like, he straight up says at some point, we don't need the grain at all. Like, the entire point of the movie is no longer important at all. The food to feed their army doesn't matter at all. It was paramount, and now it's optional. Cool. Snyder kind of made them all into these celebrities or rock stars, the Seven, instead of more humbled nobodies or forgotten people. So Korra's super team is obvious from the start that they're all amazing figures of importance, and each of their intros showcases their legendary abilities. Like, it doesn't seem like Snyder wants to build intrigue. He wants the razzle-dazzle of cool shots and moments, but it doesn't really ever serve to make the viewer feel like these are underdogs. Any mystery to their past is laid bare in the second movie on a conveyor belt, and it feels more like a pitch to a toy manufacturer for who's going to be in Wave 1 more than an engaging backstory in any way. Keep in mind, this is the kind of movie where a crazy battle is going on, but if the right guy steps into the battle, everybody stops to be super impressed. I think contrived is the word that I'm looking for. Alright, let's talk about the droid. Easily one of the most interesting and coolest characters, and really, he's not used nearly enough. It's severely disappointing. He's voiced by Anthony Hopkins, and yet, after his design and introduction, he really isn't even part of the team. There's this whole scene where one of the Imperials beats up a robot that they have that's unloading all of their gear for them. He explains that all of these robots were once warriors in their army, but after their king or general or whoever died, they all vow to become pacifists. He runs off in the movie, and we see him living in the wilds a couple brief times. He puts antlers on his head, which is cool, but it does make you wonder why and where he got the antlers. No answers in the combined 4-hour runtime here. Eventually, after a brief conversation with Korra about his pacifism, she says something like,
You're choosing a side, James.
and he decides to get involved, but he doesn't say he will. He just goes off and waits until half the farmers are dead, and then he jumps into this battle. And he kills like 100 guys in 2 minutes, and it makes you wonder, how many farmers died while he was waiting to make that entrance? Like, why did he wait? What was the point, except that Snyder got him that cool and contrived entrance into the battle? The way that one quick conversation turned his entire world around is a theme in the Rebel Moon universe. Titus, that's the gladiator general guy, he gets sober overnight, no problem. Korra almost gives up all their plans after a few ominous and threatening words from the bad guy. The Blood Axe brother only heard a few words from Korra before he leaves everything to join up with their cause. It's just not very convincing. Anyway, we get our lightsaber battle on a Superstar Destroyer, and it goes down, but not before our hero gets away in a shuttle carrying a wounded companion with them. I know, the Jedi lightsaber battle was on the Death Star and the Star Destroyer crashes into it, but you get what I'm saying. It's the main beats. It's the feels, right? Oh, and the pirates show up again, because a Netflix Star Wars series really needs those starship battles at the end. Even though we're doing Seven Samurai, and it's a farming village, and all the rest of it, you need the spaceships. So the Blood Axes come through with a squadron of fighters. Any of these lifts, or moments, or scenes, or ideas in isolation is fine, really. So many of these stories are building on familiar myths and the template of the monomyth set out by Joseph Campbell, where the basic structure of the hero's journey was something that could be found in ancient texts as well as the Matrix and the Lord of the Rings. And if you watch this channel, then you know I love these overlapping plot structures, and this series on Seven Samurai is another exploration of that kind of idea. But this is just so unabashedly Star Wars. When you string all the moments together like this, it becomes really hard not to see it. But despite all of that, maybe the most egregious sin committed over these two movies is the obligatory and obnoxious cliffhanger insinuating that it's only the beginning. For fuck's sake, come on, man. Like, and they did the Jedi funeral pyre. Like, really? See, the problem is that there's already a Star Wars. You can't just make it all again. I mean, you could, you clearly did, but that didn't make it any good, right? For all the intended homage from Seven Samurai to Star Wars, and even Marvel, there's one movie that it reminds me of more than any other, and I kept thinking of it throughout my viewing of both movies. It kept coming back to me Another visually beautiful, still fun, but ultimately hollow viewing experience, The Chronicles of Riddick. The last thing I'll say is that I didn't hate watching these movies, but I can't turn off my brain. It just doesn't work like that. So if I can't unsee it, I'm going to probably say it. I try not to put too much of my personal opinions into these videos because everybody has different tastes and it's all subjective. But I think most of these comparisons have been pretty spot on. Let me know if you agree or disagree below. Have you seen Rebel Moon? Did you like it? Hit those buttons, the like, the subscribe, help a brother out, and thank you for your time.